All right, so this is from 2017, and obviously sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of like nullification and all that idea. If there's any libertarians who are listening, you know what nullification is. Nullification is basically like when states don't agree with a federal law, they just go, we're not going to comply with it. So, go pound sand. But this isn't really the case here. This is Hans von Spakowski, senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He says, while there are many areas over which the states and the federal government share responsibility, immigration is not one of them. There are a long series of decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court upholding the authority of prior presidents under this provision and severely limiting the ability of the courts to review the president's decision. Unfortunately, at the urging of certain states, the courts have in large part ignored the Constitution, federal law, and prior precedents. They're instead substituting their judgment for that of the president and enjoining the president's executive order by implementing a temporary halt to entry from certain terrorist safe havens. Sanctuary cities are trying to prevent federal officials from finding out about criminal alien murderers, rapists, and other violent criminals that these cities would apparently rather release than have picked up and deported, so they cannot further victimize Americans. And then he goes on to talk about a federal code section, which is 8 USC 1373, prohibits states and local jurisdictions, and this is key, from preventing law enforcement officials from exchanging information with federal officials on the citizenship status of individuals they have arrested or detained. So
I had to read that paragraph like 3 times to understand it because
right.
it felt like there was like a double negative in it, which there's not. But I was like, wait, I'm not understanding. I kept reading it. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it's when you read it, it kind of sounds like, well, then isn't sanctuary states or cities okay? But if you read it again, it
Yeah.
says prohibits states and local jurisdictions from preventing their law
Right.
enforcement officials. So basically, federal law says you cannot prevent local law enforcement from not working with the federal government on issues of immigration. And again, I don't want to get down in the weeds and get all wonky. There is this thing in the Constitution called the Supremacy Clause that when there is a federal law on point and it encompasses this area of law, it rules. So basically, the Constitution gives the federal government and the president all the authority when it comes to immigration. That's it. That's the name of the game. States don't get to really deal with immigration. And this US code basically says you can't stop your local people from getting in the way if we have to enforce immigration. So right now, to answer the question whether sanctuary cities or states are legal, no, they are in violation of this code 8 USC 1373, which says you can't prohibit them or prevent them from working with federal law enforcement. So to answer the big question, are they legal? No. How will they go about enforcing sanctuary city, or I should say the other way around? How will they go about enforcing federal law? Tom Homan has said that they will probably go the route of withholding federal funding, which we'll get to in a little bit, why federal funding is so needed in California. But they can get sued by the federal government, U.S. Attorney General, who will be Pam Bondi, likely coming up in January, will sue states like California. And it's interesting, I think now that back then in 2016, it was like the cool thing to do, is the trendy thing to do for everybody to be a sanctuary city. And then eventually California was a sanctuary state. But now it's like, okay, it's this one, like Los Angeles is the only one that came out right out of the gate and was like, we're a sanctuary city. And everyone else is like, okay, cool. Like, good on you, bro. And like nobody's followed suit yet.
Berkeley tried it in 1971.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Familiar? Well, so the story is that there was a Navy aircraft carrier that was set to go back to Vietnam. And I think I could be wrong on this, but I believe there was supposed to be like 4,500 men were going back to Vietnam. And there was, of course, protest, for Vietnam and stuff. And Berkeley, the city council decided they met and voted that they would be a sanctuary city for any of the crew who didn't want to go back to Vietnam, that they would like, you can stay here and we will protect you. And there was like, I want to say 1,000 of the men, and then others, they all like, they signed this whole thing like, yes, this needs to be a thing. And then ultimately 35 ended up staying behind, but only one sought like sanctuary in the city of Berkeley.
Oh,
And
wow.
so that was a temporary thing, if you will, but I think they were maybe the first to really try that. And it just had to do with the Vietnam War. And, you didn't have to run away to Canada. You could just stay in Berkeley and we'll protect you.
So this video has been making the rounds, even though it's an old video. And this is one reason why I wanted to do this topic, is because this is Culver City. This is from a year ago. And this is a real Culver City policeman explaining to residents what it means to be a sanctuary city. So we'll take a quick look at it. It's only a couple minutes or 20 seconds long.
Because it's a sanctuary city. We do not report illegal undocumented.
So you're going to let a person who went to prison, he committed a crime in America, who's illegal right now, you're going to let him go free right now to this elevator?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Because we're a sanctuary city. I've arrested a double homicide suspect in this city before and let him walk out the door because we're a sanctuary city. We're not going to call ICE to come pick him up and deport him.
I mean, there's really no words. It's kind of crazy that there are police officers that won't do anything, and it kind of, it feels like a double-edged sword of like, well, they're going to let people, and in the video that doesn't show the whole part of the video, but there is a video where like he literally looks at the guy and like tells him like, okay, and he points away like, you can go ahead and leave, and like the guy walks away, no problem. And it just seems like, especially this past week, we're talking a lot about like no one's above the law, but this seems like illegal immigrants are above the law because police basically have no incentive to arrest them because they can't report them to ICE, they can't report them to federal authorities. So their hands are basically tied. I don't know if it makes sense for them to just let the guy go. Like, if you commit a crime, you should probably still be arrested and prosecuted for committing
Do
a
you know what
crime.
in that particular case, do you have any idea what the backstory is?
I think it was something about probably theft or something like that, or like breaking and enter. Like he was just kind of, it was kind of like,
Sorry.
yeah, I don't think it was like that big of a crime. I always let them like literally walk away. Is there anything?
So to that point too, and not to get all off topic, but that could also where Prop 47 came into play. It's like a lot of that, the petty crimes and stuff. They're just like, we're not even doing anything for this, and you're illegal. Cool, just go. We never spoke. Go. But I have one point and a question. So
Sure.
I don't understand. Okay, it's one thing to be like, all right, you're here illegally, but you're not doing anything wrong besides being here illegally. Like, I'm just going to turn my back and ignore the situation. But I don't understand protecting criminals who are doing like horrific crimes, which we're seeing that all across the United States right now, where it's like this illegal immigrant raped so and so, killed so and so, and like a lot of it's like children. It's disturbing. And then we're just like, oh, well, we're not going to deport them, which there is a part of me that feels like, okay, now I'm just going to kind of like say a bunch of random stuff, which is not the point of tonight's podcast. But like, I struggle with, do I believe in the death penalty or not? But then there's that recent case, Riley Lincoln. Am I saying her name right?
Yeah. Is it Lincoln Riley?
As a parent, like, deportation wouldn't be enough because that person is going to go and commit those crimes where if they were deported, like they're just going to continue to commit those crimes, maybe even come back to the US. But then I'm like, well, why should taxpayers pay for him to be locked up for life? And then, which I guess the death penalty is expensive too, and you're on death row forever. But like, as a parent, I'd be like, death penalty all the way. But anyway, that's beyond my point. But I'm not understanding why, in general, we're protecting these people. Like, why we're just like, oh no, they should stay here. They, like we should be a sanctuary state for them. Like, okay, I don't get that thinking. If they're here and not bothering anyone, like I'm not bothered. If they're here and they're doing these horrible things, go go to prison, go die, go back where you came from. Like, we don't want you here. I'm sorry if that sounds horrible and unchristian to me or whatever, but no, I don't want that. But I have a question for you, because now this is another area that I'm like thinking of. Both you and I are very pro small government, local government.
Yeah.
Should this, because it's a federal issue, but should it be left to the states?
Well, the Constitution explicitly says immigration is a federal issue, and I can see why, because I believe the founders thought if we left it up to the states to do immigration, you'll have issues where California will basically just open the border and let anybody in, and Texas will not, and maybe Arizona won't, New Mexico will. There had to be some uniformity in the idea of like immigration, people coming in, and national security. Those are federal issues. Those are issues that like the unified federal government has to see over. We can't have states quabbling over immigration. So do I think like, yeah, I think because it's in the original Constitution, it's what the founders intended. I think, yes, the federal government should be overseeing immigration. It should be one of the few things they oversee, including national defense. But really, that's kind of about the extent of what federal government should be doing. But I think there's an interesting argument, and I believe it might have been, was it when we had Chad Bianco on, and we were talking about the difference between like a sheriff and a chief of police. And I think he said it, I may be wrong. This was many months ago when we had Chad Bianco on. And he was basically saying sheriffs are beholden. They take an oath to the Constitution. They have different levels of like what their authority is. They take an oath to the U.S. Constitution to protect the U.S. Constitution. Police chiefs don't. They don't have that. They are beholden to the mayor. They are appointed by the mayor. Sheriffs are elected by the people, and which is why they're beholden to the Constitution. So it is interesting that SB 54 says that local law enforcement can't cooperate with ICE, yet a sheriff who doesn't want to listen to them could be like, well, my argument about the U.S. Constitution and the federal supremacy clause overrides SB 54. So therefore, I'm going to cooperate with ICE and federal. And I think they'd have a winning case. If they went to federal court and they were like, you violated SB 54, they'd be like, well, actually, I'm just complying with the Constitution, which says federal government has supremacy over immigration. I'm just working with them. You can't, and that code section, which is USC 1373, like you can't, I'm just following my rule. And I could see that like maybe if there's conservative sheriffs here in California, they might say like, no, I'm going to work with the federal government. There's nothing you can do about it. I know I have a winning argument in court. Probably gone over it with my general counsel. We'd win. Hey, thanks for checking out the California Underground Podcast. If you enjoyed that clip, make sure you subscribe, like, share, review, comment, all that stuff that helps with the algorithm, helps people find us more. And if you want to learn more, you can always listen to our full podcast at Apple, Spotify, Google, all those different places that you basically find podcasts. Or if you just want to keep watching clips, you can check out clips here, or you can subscribe to our channel right here, somewhere in here.